In his book, Here, There, and Everywhere, My Life Recording the Music of the Beatles, engineer Geoff Emerick recalls a historic session in the Sgt. Pepper's album, one mid-January morning in 1967. The four Beatles appeared at EMI Studios a little bit stoned, as had become usual, but with a tinge of excitement. They had a new song they'd been working on, one of John Lennon's, and they were anxious to play it for George Martin and me. The song unveiled that evening was tentatively called In the Life of. In time, the world would know it as A Day in the Life. This is the story of how they made it, and the 5 decisive moments that turned it into a masterpiece. John Lennon wrote the melody and most of the lyrics to the verses of A Day in the Life in mid-January 1967. He came up with a haunting, dreamlike fragment, an introduction, 3 verses, and a chorus. The lyrics were mainly inspired by contemporary newspaper articles.
It was mainly a John song, and he had the, I read the news today, oh boy, and he'd taken a lot of it from a newspaper.
So it had 2 stories. One was the Guinness child had killed himself in a car. That was the main headline story. On the next page was about 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire.
So the Blackburn, Lancashire, the holes, Albert Hall, all just got mixed, you know, just a little poetic jumble that sounded nice.
Soon afterwards, he presented the song to Paul McCartney.
And this often happened. One of us would have a little bit of an idea, and instead of sitting down and sweating it, we'd just bring it to the other one and kind of finish it together, because you could ping pong. You know, you get an idea, and he get an idea, and oh, that's good, you know. And so I say you had the first verse. I read the news today, oh boy, and we sat in my music room in London and just started playing around with it, got a second verse.
John and Paul took the song to the session on January 19th. The composition was incomplete but powerful. It immediately engaged everyone.
It was like one of the biggest moments of my life because, you know, from the very outset of the song, when John just ran through it in the studio, and I was down in the studio, and, you know, you could just feel the magic in the vocal on that. So anyway, you know, we went back up into the control room, and we were about to start recording the song in its basic form. And like shivers ran down your back from that vocal performance, you know.
But the moment I remember was when we got to a little bit that he didn't have, where we sort of said, I'd love to turn you on. And we like looked at each other and think like, we know what we're doing here, don't we? We're actually saying for the first time ever, like words like turn you on, you know, and which was in the culture anyway, but no one had actually said it on record yet.
But the song was still unfinished. It lacked a middle section, and Paul offered a solution from an unexpected place. An unfinished song of his own.
And then I had another bit. Woke up, fell out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. That was a little bit I had. It wasn't doing anything. And so we thought, well, that'd be good. We could put that in the middle. And we got the concept of sort of building it a little bit like a sort of mini operetta.
He stuck it on now. Instead of going on and developing that lick into the middle 8, which we would normally do, we got into putting a whole different song which he already had that had nothing to do with Day in the Life.
Paul's fragment created the perfect contrast to the song's dreamlike opening. A rush of morning routine, grounded in everyday life. The Beatles laid down the basic track, John on guitar and vocals, Paul at the piano, Ringo tapping a bongo, and George shaking a pair of maracas. Now the song had a complete structure. Lennon's ethereal verses, Paul's brisk middle section, and an enormous gap between them. To connect the end of the second verse and the start of McCartney's middle section, they added a 24-bar bridge.
We connected them with a series of empty bars on either side of Paul's section before we came back into John's as a reprise. And we knew we had to fill those bars with something sensational, and we didn't know what it was going to be yet.
The gap would be filled with one of the most recognizable climaxes in pop music history. John imagined a sound that would begin small, then grow bigger and bigger until it engulfed everything.
They told me they wanted an orchestral climax to fill these empty bars, a giant orgasm of sound, rising from nothing at all to the most incredible noise.
Paul proposed using a full orchestra. George Martin, mindful of the cost, hesitated.
Someone said to George Martin, well, you know, we need a 90-piece orchestra to go in those gaps. And then George said, well, EMI won't pay for that because EMI is still paying for the sessions. So then Ringo said, well, let's get a 45-piece orchestra and put it on twice.
Over the next days, John, Paul, and George Martin shaped the idea. Each musician would start at the lowest note of their instrument and climb to the highest, each at their own pace. An organized chaos, a controlled explosion.
And with that, we joined up the two parts of the song.
Geoff Emerick recalls this in his book. I think it would be great if we ask each member of the orchestra to play randomly, Paul suggested. George Martin was aghast. Randomly? That will just sound like a cacophony. It's pointless. Okay, well then, not completely randomly. Maybe we could get each of them to do a slow climb from the lowest note their instrument can play up to the highest note. Yeah, interjected John, and also have them start really quietly and get louder and louder, so that it eventually becomes an orgasm of sound. George Martin was still unconvinced. The problem, he explained, is that you can't ask classical musicians of that caliber to improvise and not follow a score. They'll simply have no idea what to do.
Orchestras don't like that kind of thing. They like it written down, and they like to know exactly what they're supposed to do.
John seemed lost in thought for a moment, and then brightened up. Well, if we put them in silly party hats and rubber noses, maybe then they'll understand what it is we want. That will loosen up those tight asses. The idea was to get them into the spirit of things, to create a party atmosphere. Lennon began reeling off a list of what he wanted Mal Evans to purchase at the novelty store. Silly hats, rubber noses, clown wigs, bald head pates, gorilla paws, and lots of clip-on nipples. The recording session started to turn into something more. It became a happening. The fourth and final session for A Day in the Life took place on Friday, February 10th, 1967. Studio 1 at Abbey Road was transformed. There were balloons, costumes, and champagne. Guests filed in: Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, Keith Richards, Donovan, and members of the Monkees, all drawn by the sense that something historic was about to happen. The Beatles wandered around the room, entertaining everyone as gracious hosts. Every now and then some gatecrasher would be removed from the crowd with a certain degree of force and ejected from the party. The orchestra arrived in their tuxedos. Some embraced the spirit. Others glared in disbelief. Horn player Alan Civil said, "It seemed almost like a party with booze, fags, and such. It was crazy. You couldn't believe it was a session."
Plus the fact that that night they were asked to wear tuxedos and all these funny noses and funny glasses and all these novelty things and stuff. So that added to the tension.
George Martin explained to the orchestra leader what it was he wanted the musicians to do. The general response was of confusion and dismay. Paul then joined the conversation.
I said to the orchestra, you should start, all of you, which they're all looking at me puzzled. We've got a real symphony orchestra. And I'm saying, what you got to do is everyone start on the lowest note that your instrument could play and work your way up to the highest at your own pace. Just if you want to go, that's fine. Or, that was too puzzling for them.
These were the finest musicians you'd get in London. And for years they've been taught to play as one man. I suddenly said to them, don't listen to the fellow next door to you. Make your own way up this huge climax. And if you're playing anything like the fellow next door to you, you're playing a wrong note.
And luckily there was David Mason who'd played the piccolo trumpet on Penny Lane, and Alan Civil who'd done the French horn on For No One. And he said, no, come on lads, we can do this, because they played on a couple of the singles, and what was happening in front of our eyes now was the fact this barrier between the classical people and the pop people was gradually being broken down slightly, and it was. From that night, it was broken down.
Quite a bit of time was wasted as they struggled to clarify things for the puzzled musicians. Finally, George Martin raised his baton. Silence fell. And then 40 musicians began their ascent, a disjointed and chaotic buildup. Every attempt was recorded. 8 climbs in total, each swelling from nothingness into a tidal wave of sound. Paul took a turn conducting, urging them higher. John wandered the studio, lost in the music. Every guest watched in amazement. Technicians prayed balloons wouldn't pop during the take. What emerged was unlike anything ever captured on record.
I knew this was like a big song from the minute John brought it in and we started working on it.
The song would close Sgt. Pepper, a landmark album, and it needed an ending worthy of that legacy. After the orchestra left, Paul asked the other Beatles and their guests to stick around to try an idea he planned to overdub later. Everyone humming the same note in unison.
We thought of all the ideas of Buddhist monks chanting. Thought it'd be a great idea to have everybody massed in the studio doing Om and hanging on to it, and multiply that many times. And this was one of those bright ideas that just didn't work.
So then they went over to the idea of creating a monumental piano chord that instead of fading out would dissolve slowly and naturally, its resonance lingering for nearly a full minute.
I'd noticed that with a piano, how long, if you hold down a loud pedal on a piano, how long the chord lasts.
So we got everybody that was available to play a chord on the piano. We had 3 people on one piano, had several pianos at once, and we recorded many of them, one after the other. And at the same time, Geoff Emerick, the engineer, would bring up the faders in the dial wave. We all kept very, very quiet, so that the ringing of the pianos went on and on.
The result had a profound sense of finality, an ending that feels both vast and intimate, perfectly sealing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band with a moment of suspended time. A moment that turned everyone on.